Hello and welcome everybody, I'm Barbarian and this is Victoria 3's Dev Diary number 17. Today we will be talking about states, and today is the first Dev Diary which disappoints me, quite severely actually. And not because of what is in the Dev Diary. I think what is in the Dev Diary, those are solid mechanics, those are evolving mechanics that moved on from Victoria 2 concepts, and I think they fill their role quite well. But rather, I'm disappointed by what isn't in the Dev Diary, and that is something that if you watched last week's video in which I explained what my big concern towards states was, you will probably understand where I'm coming from there. If not, then I'm going to explain myself. I haven't really seen this talked about at all in the Victoria community, so I'm concerned maybe I'm just in the minority opinion, position, and that is fine, completely reasonable, but I do want to bring it up because maybe many people just didn't notice this, and maybe they should be concerned. Either way, I am very hopeful, as always, that we have a great discussion. Later tonight, there will actually be a video of me covering I think the last 3 weeks worth of community feedback, because we haven't done that in a while. I want to do it in its extra video, so that's going to come tonight as well. We're not going to cover the dev responses from last week's Dev Diary in this video, because honestly, I read them and I was like, we hit the nail on the head there. I think we got that. We pretty much managed to understand the system in a way that is really the system, and how the devs then further explained it in the comments. If you want to check them out, this will of course be linked in the description. But for now, let's just jump into the Dev Diary and into the good parts and into the not included bad parts. This is the teaser that was published yesterday. This basically showed Britannia, so Brittany, and this is basically just to show off a modifier here. Tomorrow Dev Diary is a roundup on states and how a variety of different mechanics relating to them work. As a teaser, here is a look at homelands, one of set mechanics that ties into both states and cultures. Now, these are homelands, and basically the homelands, so Brittany, are homelands to the cultures French and Breton. So far so good. I assume maybe there are modifiers here. It's not really explained in the Dev Diary either. Maybe there are modifiers for not assimilating, maybe there are modifiers for migration there, maybe there are modifiers just in general, whether these people that view this as their homeland can, for example, trigger international crises, so diplomatic plays, to gain land, to lose land, and so on and so forth. Maybe this is also simply related to them saying, I want to be independent, I have a movement here where I will say, yeah, of course, I want to rise up, I want Brittany under the control of the Bretons. That sort of stuff can be done via homelands. I think this is a neat system. We're going to see that mentioned in the Dev Diary as well. Let's jump into the actual diary. Today's diary is going to be a little bit different, that it will mostly be about collecting and further explaining the various mechanics that tie into states. There might not be a whole lot of new information here for people who have been closely following the development, but we feel it is important to put all this information in the same place and clarify a few points. So far so good. Makes a lot of sense to me. I think that is a very valid approach, because states is one of those topics, it seems very straightforward, but it is so interconnected to everything that happens in the game and in the world that, explaining it, I think, is a good step. States, as we have previously touched on, are the main political geographical unit of Victoria 3, and I do want to sort of slide in here. That is also true for Victoria 2. In Victoria 2, you had proper provinces, but at the end of the day, when you interacted with things, when you built factories and so on and so forth, when you went to war for something, it was about states and not just about a province. So yeah, not much change there, but of course Victoria 3 will go a bit harder into this direction as states become ever more important. This is where pops live and buildings are built. Before we proceed, it will be useful to understand the difference between states and state regions. A state is always controlled by a single country, and its borders are dynamic. This can change over the course of the game, including being created and destroyed. We're going to get back to this exact phrasing a bit later. While state regions can contain one or several states and have static borders unchanging throughout the game. If a single country owns all provinces within a state region, so if they have that just in one state, there's no practical difference between these concepts. If I am the United States of America and I hold the entirety of South Dakota, my state, South Dakota, is the same as the state region, South Dakota, right? So far so good, makes sense. But if, for example, the Lakota, and I'm gonna get to why I'm mentioning the Lakotans and the US here in particular, but if South Dakota is also partially held by the Lakotans, then we have two states in this area. One is American or US American and one is Lakotan, and those two states, of course, yeah, they're two states, they belong each to a different country, but they're both within the same state region. For example, the state region of the Rhineland is a predetermined set of provinces on the border of France that in 1836 contains two states. Prussian Rhineland, actually just called Rhineland because it contains more than half the land in the region. Very, very cool. I think if you hold the supremacy over a traditional region, then it does make sense that you just say, yeah, this is not the Prussian Rhineland, this is the Rhineland. So far, so good. And the Bavarian Rhineland, called Bavarian Rhineland to distinguish it from the Prussian parts, a concept that we call a split state. Over the course of the game, which exact provinces make up the state region of Rhineland will never change, but but the states might. If France was to conquer the Prussian Rhineland, there would of course no longer be a Prussian Rhineland but a French Rhineland, and if Prussia were to conquer the Bavarian Rhineland, the entire state region would be unified into a single Prussian state. We can actually see this here, at least a little bit if I scroll. I have so many images because we're gonna talk about a lot of things, believe you me. This is the Rhineland, you can see it right here. In Victoria 2, I believe this was the Rhineland, so this part was also part of the Rhineland region. Now, in this one, I'm not sure, I don't think this is actually a part there, I don't think this is separate, I believe this is just one region, Hessen, I assume. But basically, or Hessen-Nassau, whatever you want to call it. But basically what we have here is this idea, this is the Bavarian Rhineland, this is the Rhineland that belongs to Prussia, technically the Prussian Rhineland, but since they hold more than 50%, just the Rhineland. So far so good. The example was if France were to conquer the Prussian Rhineland, then of course you would have the French Rhineland instead of the Prussian one, and the state that the Prussians once had in this state region is no longer existing, but instead the French now have their own state there. That's a big issue. That's a big issue for me, but we're gonna get to that in a second when we actually work through the dev diary. So let's go back to the dev diary first. Right, this was this one. If France was to conquer, and if Prussia were to conquer the Bavarian Rhineland, the entire state region would be unified. Political control of the state region of Rajputana is split between numerous Indian princes, none of which control enough of the region for their part to be considered Rajputana proper. Which to me sounds like it's primarily just really something that is a naming thing, but we're gonna get to that as well. We can see it right here, and I'm gonna zoom in a bit further actually. You can see right here that Jodhpur is a split state, and this split state belongs, you know, of course, the states of Rajputana, which is the state region, they belong to Bikaner, which is right there. It belongs to Jaisalmer, which is right there behind the tooltip, then Mewar, which is down here, then Jodhpur, which is right there, and Jaipur, which is right over there. A split state is a state region split into smaller states. If one country takes control of more than one part of the split state, they will combine it into a single state. Oh, and I think it's way better if I zoom this far in. Yeah, let's just leave it here. So effectively, and I got some screenshots here. This is the historical region of Rajputana. This right here, I believe, is a British enclave that they held directly, doesn't matter. But if you compare this, you know, if you look at this here, this is Jaisalmer, this is Bikaner, this is Mawa or Jodhpur, then we have Jaipur right there, and then we have Mewar down here in the bottom. There's some extra differences here, but I don't think it matters that much. As you can see here, these are the exact states. I marked it on this screenshot that they posted in the last update video, and you can see that this is the total state region of Rajputana, currently split in 5 ways between these 5 ones. If I go back, then you will see this here as well. This is the exact border that I marked effectively, right? Keep that in mind, because this screenshot and many screenshots like it will give me a bit of a headache later on in the video. Now, in addition to political ownership, there are a number of conditions that can apply to a state that affect the local population and economy. First of all, there's something called incorporation status, representing a state's political status within the country that owns it. Right, so incorporated states are states that is a fully integrated political unit in the country. This state incurs full bureaucracy costs, so remember, when you have institutions, these institutions cost you bureaucracy. You have this basically this framework that you can work with, and if you go over it, then your institutions will suffer, and so on and so forth. You will, I believe, get less taxes, but primarily, of course, if you have an incorporated state, all of your population in that state will get the benefits and maybe even the drawbacks, depending on what that institution is of the institution. So in that case, you pay the bureaucracy cost. It also pays all forms of taxes required by the government and gets the benefit of all national institutions. An unincorporated state, a state that is owned but only very lightly administrated by the country, such as frontier states. Unincorporated states do not incur any bureaucracy costs, but only pay certain taxes, such as, for example, consumption tax, get no benefits from national institutions, and have reduced infrastructure. So, let's say I am Germany and I conquer Posen. I believe... You know what, don't correct me, I'm actually not sure. I think Posen may have been, I believe this is like the Polish corridor, whatever. I believe it was under German control at the time. Let's say I conquer the rest of Poland, right, whatever Russia is holding there. All of those states wouldn't be incorporated, they would be unincorporated, making it so, yes, I, am the administration here, but we are not really applying the same circumstances, the same standards to anything going on in that state compared to the core of Germany, for example. Then we have colonial states, a state that is considered to be an overseas colony, works similarly to an unincorporated state, but also gets increased immigration at the expense of even lower infrastructure. So basically, it is very difficult in a colonial state. Obviously, they're not in a position of actually getting your healthcare insurances down there, but they are in a position of, your people moving down there to, for example, become landowners and so on and so forth. But also, you are there primarily for resource extraction. That is at least the theory behind it, and that means it is quite difficult because you're not really administrating it in all that great a detail. And to actually get the resources that you need out, you're in a position of saying, hey, you know, of course we need to build even more railroads, we need to be very precise with where we build them, and they abstracted this basically into a system where they say, okay, you build railroads, but it will be difficult, you have to build it up a bit more than usually would be necessary to get out the resources that you want. I think that is fine. Obviously, you could argue, yeah, okay, but why do I have to build up the entire state's railroads, the entire state's infrastructure? And that's a valid point, because ultimately you only want a railroad from the port right to where you extract the resources, but hey, this is a level of abstraction. I can live with this solution, I will tell you outright. Is it ideal? I mean, at the end of the day, I think there's just a lot of micro involved. If you were to split it up where you actually built this straight railroad, this one is a bit more straightforward. It does the same thing, and I don't think it really hinders realism, immersion, or gameplay, so I'm not against it at all. It is possible to incorporate any unincorporated or colonial state as long as you have the bureaucracy that would be needed to properly administrate it, but this can be a rocky process, and this is pretty cool. While the increased costs kick in immediately, the benefits, so taxes, institutions, and so on, are only gradually phased in over time. I like this a lot. Obviously, your entire apparatus comes over and says we are building up the same infrastructure, the same police network, the same healthcare networks, the same education networks, but you're kind of new here, and we don't really have anybody that is currently working these jobs, you know, we don't have any situation, these buildings may not be built, we are looking at a situation where this isn't quite possible, so it will take time, and this is pretty neat. The time it takes depends on how easy it is for a country to integrate the local population. It would be a lot more difficult for Britain to incorporate an Indian state than it would be for them to incorporate the Falklands, for example. You know, Argentina, don't worry about it, okay? The idea behind this is without a doubt something that we could call maybe coring. This is something where we go, yes, we have a core here, this is an essential part of our realm, but I will also say that I actually prefer this vastly over, for example, you know, saying, hey, we have a situation here in EU4 where you click a button and then it does take time to core something, but like, not really an impact for you coring it, it's just, yeah, you click the button and then you wait. In this one, this is pretty neat. Obviously, it is difficult to have a population that is totally different, that doesn't understand your way of life, because you are just, you know, literally at the other side of the globe. It's quite interesting to me that they chose this approach. I really actually like it, that they basically go, yep, we are in a position where it takes time. Coring, well, in this case, it's not coring, but it is incorporating. Incorporating something should take time, depending on how homogeneous you are, or you know, relate to this population that you are coring right now. Well, incorporating, my apologies. Let's stay with the Wiki 3 nomenclature here. I think this is a good solution. It really makes it so that you could have a riled up population if they don't want to be, you know, living in the way that you are living, that sort of stuff. If, you know, you're pushing too much on them, if, for example, they are discriminated, and you know, are saying, hey, I don't really want this tax burden, I'm discriminated, this is just leave me out of this, right? This is something that I personally believe could have a really, really cool effect, so I'm a big fan of this. This is one of the big positives for me from this dev diary. Now, other conditions that can apply are, you know, general state modifiers. So, capital state, the political capital of a country. All pops living in the capital state have increased political power. Capital states, this is something you can see right here in Lima. So, Lima is the capital of the state of Lima, but also, most importantly, the state, rather the capital of the actual country of Peru. And as you can see right here, you can see the star right there, you can see the star right there. This is clearly a state modifier that says this is the capital state of this country, so this is quite evident there. Then the market capital is the economic capital of a country, has increased infrastructure and migration attraction. Actually, let's take a step back. All pops living in the capital state have increased political power. I mean, I think it does make sense if you lived in Berlin, if you lived in Paris, if you lived in, for example, Madrid, if you lived in London, if you lived in, I mean, you know, later on Italy, then you could most certainly say that you have more influence. If you live in Athens, if you live in Istanbul, you know, until it is turned around and it is Ankara after the fall of the Ottoman Empire, if you live there, then you generally will have a more networking ability, basically, to say, yes, of course, I will take influence on the politics, and the market capital is fairly similar, except for economics. It has increased infrastructure and migration attraction. If you look at this here in particular, let me choose an easy screenshot right here. This is the market capital of the Prussian market, this is the market capital of the Danish market, right here of the Austrian market, and of the Dutch market, of course. So all that stuff, I think it checks out. Now, I do want to point out the capital state and the market capital do not have to be synonymous. When we looked at Austria, at, you know, the Netherlands, at Denmark, and at Prussia, then they were also the capital state, but they don't have to be. For example, we know that in the United States of America, New York is the state that is the market capital, and the capital state is, of course, Washington, D.C. Now, then there's also turmoil, and this is not an exhaustive list, so there's of course much more going on. Turmoil. A state has too many political radicals as a percentage of population and will experience turmoil. A state with turmoil suffers penalties in the form of increased tax waste and reduced migration attraction. These penalties can be reduced by investing into the police institution. I assume, of course, that the penalties of turmoil don't end here, but that is then something that, moves into political movements. That is where you feel that rather than simply in the state. I also assume that, depending on whether you have turmoil or not, if you were to have a civil war, this is what determines which states stay with you and which states go to the rebels, or vice versa if you want to become the rebels. So, what we have here, pretty cool. This is Pennsylvania. It is an incorporated state. It is contributing both taxes and a star on the flag to the United States of America. So it is confirmed indeed that if you incorporate states as the USA, you will gain additional stars. I don't think, at least I'm not remembering at the very least, I don't think you can unincorporate states, but if you can, maybe you can, then you could also remove stars. Either way, this is a pretty flexible way of doing flags, and I very much hope that this is something that is moddable, that is applicable to many other countries. Of course, in Victoria 2, it was basically limited to just saying, fundamentally limited to saying, okay, your flag will primarily, exclusively alter in a sort of dynamic way if you change your ideology and your state and whatnot, like the base organization. But in Victoria 3, it seems to be more complex. This is directly related to how many incorporated states you have. Maybe this is moddable to saying, hey, how many vassals do you have that you could unify maybe in the flag? Maybe that's a bit too complex, but there's some generally interesting ideas here. As you can see, Pennsylvania is using bureaucracy, of course, for the institutions, and then this is scaled by the population that lives within Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania also not yet hitting its infrastructure maximum, so it is doing quite well. States can also inherit certain conditions from their state regions. So let's remind ourselves, this entire thing here is a state region. If somebody held this land and then the US held that land, those would be two states within one state region. Any given state will always be confined to exactly one state region. Okay, so basically, there's no state that looks like this. This would be a state, and then this would be a state. Okay, because they are always confined to the same state region. If the US were to conquer this Japanese West Pennsylvania, they would then afterwards unify these two states into a state that fits the state region, just so that we are on the same understanding when it comes to the nomenclature. Very important going forward. So let's talk about conditions that stem from the state regions. State traits. As explained in the infrastructure dev diary, these represent a variety of geographical features that have an impact on the economy, infrastructure, and or population of the entire state region. Quite interesting, okay. Claims. A state region can be claimed by a country that does not currently own it, but are broadly considered to have a legitimate reason to think that maybe they should. We'll come back to this when talking about diplomacy and war, so these are very classic claims. There has been some discourse on whether homelands and claims are basically a split in cause. In cause, of course, fundamentally means, yes, this nation in Victoria 2, which means it's equivalent to basically this nation and this culture, well, nationality actually in Victoria 2 is how it was called. These two both consider this their core. In Victoria 3, this looks like it is split up. Maybe a claim is basically just, yeah, I should own this. This is like, I can declare war against you to acquire this state, and I won't suffer that much. It won't be called aggressive expansion, right? What was it called? Tension? Something like that anyway in Victoria 3. It's not infamy anymore, it is something else. It's not EU4's aggressive expansion either. But either way, it appears that Claims fulfills this on a political level, while Homelands fulfills this on a cultural level. Every culture has one or more state regions that most people in the culture consider to be their natural homeland. This does not consider the views of anyone else outside that culture. I can't read anymore. The Swedes don't get any say in which state regions the Russian consider to be their homelands, and vice versa, of course, because, hey, it's just your culture saying, yeah, of course, there's people from there that are like me, so yeah, there you go, that's my cultural homelands, right? It doesn't matter whether, for example, the Bretons and the French think Brittany is both their homeland, because yeah, they can consider that independently. That's perfectly fine from a gameplay and from an accuracy point of view. This has certain effects that we'll go over in later dev diaries. Now, there's an issue here with state traits, but we're gonna get to that in a second. Listen, I'm generally, as you can see here, I'm happy with the way these state modifiers in general work. I'm happy with the incorporated states. I am happy with the naming of the states, for example. I'm happy with the flag of the United States of America. Let's go to what I consider to be the best part of this dev diary, and then let me talk about what I think are basically sort of missed opportunities, missed windows, things that I either view as a step back or as a lateral move compared to Victoria 2 and compared to my expectations. What we have right here is guano was a central pillar of the Peruvian economy in the mid-19th century, and a war was even fought over control of the Chincha Islands between Spain and Peru. The icon for this particular state trait is a placeholder. So the Chincha Islands here actually give you plus 20% sulfur mines building throughput. You can see this is also the capital state. I assume this means it's the market capital. This is the homeland of, I can only assume, Peruvians. Aren't they actually just called South Andean in Victoria 3? I believe they are. Or maybe they're Peruvians. Actually, no, they're probably Peruvians, because these are still the Andes. So, like, it would be Peruvians, right? This means undiscovered resources. We're going to get to that in a second. And this effectively means it is an incorporated state. So far, so clear. I think all of that makes sense. And here comes the good part. I really like this part. Yeah. As mentioned all the way back in the dev diary about buildings, states are limited in which resource industry building types they can support and how large these can get. For example, if you are in a state that has no mountains, you are very unlikely to be able to build iron mines, right? This is similar, in a way, to the RGOs, so the fundamental resource producing locations in Victoria 2, but it is not exactly the same. If you, for example, in Victoria 2, hey, if you don't hold this exact province, then you get 0 of this sort of region's potential benefit from that resource. If you have a location that produces coal and you don't hold that exact province, you will never be able to get any coal. But they have a really cool, pretty flexible solution here for this. For example, the degree of iron deposits in a state limits how many levels of iron mine you can build there. These resource limits are actually a property of state regions, which is dynamically allocated to the states in the region based on how large of a share the state holds. It's worth noting that this proportion isn't just based on the raw number of provinces owned. This is really cool in my opinion, really, really cool. As an example, potential for fisheries are distributed according to the amount of coastline a state has in the state region. Basically, they got rid of this being anchored in provinces, but then still anchored it in provinces in a very light fashion, right? This is pretty lightweight. I really like this idea. You don't have the fishery RGO directly in this province and in that province and in that province, but you just say, yeah, you have potential for fishing here, and should this state be split for whatever reason, then you will distribute it based on how many of those fishing provinces you hold, or fishing likely locations you hold, and then you can work off of that. I think this is a good compromise between not really valuing provinces at all and valuing provinces, frankly, a bit too much, where it is very, very static. Obviously, these industries were very distributed over the entire area. Right, this was for fisheries. While arable land can be heavily weighted by the amount of prime land is in each state. So you have a region, a state region, that state region has certain prime land, and the more prime land you hold in your section of that state region, the more arable land will you have, the more can you go into, agriculture. While not applicable everywhere, prime land is something we use in states where there is a clear division between fertile and non-fertile land. Control of the Nile should matter a lot more to a state in Upper Egypt's arable land than control of the surrounding desert, for example, in Lower Egypt. It is also possible for a state region to contain discoverable resources. These are resources such as oil, gold, or rubber that are either not known about or not considered exploitable at the start of the game, but may be discovered and exploited at a later point. Certain technologies will affect both which resources can be discovered and the actual chance of said resource being discovered. All of this functions in a weighted random fashion, so while the state of there being a Klondike gold rush at some point during the game is high, it probably won't happen exactly at the same date it did historically. If you played Victoria 2, I imagine this to be fairly comparable to how, it went in Victoria 2. For example, when it comes to innovations, was it even called innovations? I believe so. Could be called something else. Yeah, it was, I think it was called inventions, right? That's what it was called, not innovations. I was thinking about Imperator Rome there, I believe. Basically, I believe it is very similar there, where you have this resource, and yes, you now have the tools to discover this, but there's a random chance, let's say every week, maybe something like that, to trigger the idea that, yes, of course, we now found this, or yes, we can exploit this now, and this will be fairly random. But as soon as you get the tech, there is always a chance, there's a ticking modifier there that makes this happen eventually. So that is fine. It makes it so that Klondike sometimes will be discovered earlier, sometimes later. I hope it is pronounced Klondike, honestly. I've made so many pronunciation errors, I don't even care anymore. We right here have the Yukon territory. There are discoverable resources there. There are undiscovered resources deposits in this state. These resources have a chance to be discovered each day if the state is part of a non-isolated state region. So actually it's per day. So every 4 ticks, you have a chance of getting a resource discovery right there. This one is held by a company here. So this is the HPC. It is a homeland, of course, to certain cultures. That makes perfect sense. And this is it for this dev diary. This one was about states. The next one will be about politics, in particular about the topic of migration, which is pretty cool. I like that. But I want to talk a bit about states and why I'm very, very unhappy about what we didn't see here today. If you watched last week's video, then you will know, but let me introduce you to my concern. So there are 2 issues here that I would like to address. The first one is, of course, a bit easier. The second one is not that easy. The first one is related to state-region modifiers. For example, this is an issue that has been addressed by others, that has been brought up by others, so this one is very easy to actually explain, but I want it to be on your mind. This one is about a state-region modifier such as minus 10% state-region infrastructure. So wherever you are, if you are in this state, you will always, in this state-region, you will always get this modifier, even if, because what justifies this is the Burmese woods here, the forest, right? Even if you don't have any forests in your state that belongs to the state-region of Burma, even if you don't have any section of the Alps in your state that is within the state region of Lombardy, which gets we saw that previously, I don't know exactly where it is, maybe Grugi also posted that? No, it doesn't appear so. Basically, but under any circumstances, even if you just hold a port, you will get minus 10% state region infrastructure, which is a bit odd to me. What we have right here is the option and the possibility to flexibly and honestly adequately calculate which resources are in which state depending on how much is available in a state region. If you hold the coast, you get all the fisheries. If you don't hold the coast, you don't get any of the fisheries. Why can't I get this modifier that is a state region modifier for being in the mountains only if I hold the mountains? Right? That's where I'm coming from, basically. That is one of the issues that has been brought up by others, but what I haven't seen brought up, I brought it up last week. I got feedback of people that agreed in general. I don't think anybody else has ever discussed it, so this is going to be tough for me to make clear what I'm so frustrated with, why I, am frustrated with this dev diary. Well, frustrated is the wrong word. It's more, I was expecting more, basically. I was hoping for more, right? But I am talking about the general issue of split states and why I don't think we're making any step forward on this topic from Victoria 2. Basically, I remember when Liana, who got to see an early sort of presentation about Victoria 3, right? Maybe some gameplay as well. I'm not actually sure. Obviously, there's an NDA involved there as well. But she went and she made a list on Reddit. I might actually just link it. And in that list, she wrote, for example, states can be split. And everybody was ecstatic. I was ecstatic. But I'll be honest with you, I don't see it. There's one reason, obviously, where states can be split, and that is treaty ports. If I were to take, which you can't do, I assume, but if I were to take the city of Lima, or let's say Hong Kong, or let's say Shanghai, or let's say Macau, right? If I were to take those, obviously, I'm splitting the state region that currently is the state region of Lima, under complete control by Peru, which makes it so that Lima, the state, is also Lima, the state region. But once I take the city of Lima, which, let's say I do that, right? Once I take it, this would have two states that then together are the total number within the state region. Now, the interesting thing about this is that something that I noted last video works perfectly well here. What is that? That is, you can see it here as well. Every state region appears to only have one market that at any given time it can belong to. You can see it right here. Nepal holds the biggest chunk of this state region, which is all of these. And because of that, the Nepali market stretches over all of them. Burma holds the biggest chunk of what I believe to be maybe South Burma, right? And this is why this section that belongs to the British is in the Burmese market. This is why in Siam, right, close to Bangkok here actually, you're looking at this being a chunk of the Indochina region, state region, right? We're looking at, for example, I think we have a screenshot here. Yeah, there we go. This section also actually belongs to Malaysia, the state region, and that is why it also belongs to the Joborian market. Okay, so far so clear. It works if we are talking about treaty ports, because you explicitly take a treaty port that then is a part, the express purpose of a treaty port is to be a part of the market of a different country. But this system appears to not make a difference between treaty ports and regular split states, meaning that, well, we get results such as this one, the Lakotan market. South Dakota is a state region, and you can see that here as well. They already confirmed that in the USA, the state regions generally follow the lines of genuine US states. This is South Dakota right here. Didn't really change, of course. It's South Dakota. It is what it is. A weird square with like a chipped corner right there. I don't know the history. Hey, if you're from South Dakota, God bless you. But Lakota, which appears to be this entity here, this political entity, holds the largest chunk of South Dakota out of anybody. The rest is held right here by the US and right there by the US. That is one state in the US called American American South Dakota. And then we have this Native American tribe who I forgot who they were, and they hold a slightly smaller portion than the Lakotans, meaning that this entire state region is part of the Lakotan market, because any state region can only be a part of one market. We can see it here as well. Texas is just this. This is Texas. This is all it is. These are, I believe, Native Americans as well. This is, of course, Mexico. And because of this, the entirety of the state region of Texas belongs to the Texan market. And I find that weird. I find that not good. Because effectively, it makes sense for treaty ports to say if I take, I don't know, let's say I take NYC, right? I don't know. Felt like it. If I take it, obviously, as a treaty port, I do that to gain access here. Then I can start importing over here. I can say, yeah, the goods from my market need to go over there. And then I can funnel it into the American market, right? I can set certain things there that make it so, yep, I want my goods in there and I want to extract goods. Of course, the US, if they wanted my treaty port gone, would have to do a lot of things. You know, go to war, get my land back, maybe by making a deal with me, by doing a treaty, whatever, that sort of stuff, right? But that's not the case for all of these situations where you hold something in a different state region belong to somebody else. This is the best example. Why do the Lakotans have supremacy in the market? And supremacy sounds weird, but why do the people here trade exclusively their goods and whatnot and buy their goods from the Lakotan market rather than this market? This isn't even a market, because they do not hold the largest chunk of any given state within any of these regions. This is, I believe, North Dakota right here, and this is clearly in control, in the majority, by the US. This is, listen, whatever that is. This state right here, clearly in the majority, held by the United States of America. All of this stuff, clearly in the majority, held by the United States of America, leading us to a situation where effectively these people here are trading with New York, because it goes to the market capital, right? You need the infrastructure to build it up there. We had that in national markets, we had that in infrastructure. And this section of the same country trades with them. I don't understand. Unless you have actual trade deals, unless you have actual pacts, unless you have, you know, whatever. How? Why? You know, like, these, for example, here, they lie within state borders. They're right here. They're between 3 states. They have no chance of ever getting their own market. This is a tiny fraction, this is a tiny fraction of the state, and this is a tiny fraction of the state. They are cemented, no matter their relationships with Mexico, within the Mexican market, meaning they will be trading with the market capital in Mexico City. It is weird to me. It is really weird to me. The worst examples we can see right here. So this is Prussian Rhineland, this is Bavarian Rhineland. They are all part of the Zollverein, sorry. Of the Zollverein, which is a standardization. Customs are slowly being relaxed. I really want to stress that as well. Customs at this time did not end at arbitrary borders. They ended where your state border was, right? Maybe if you live in Europe, for example, in the EU in particular, of course, if you live in the US, you don't realize this that much because you are in a position where, hey, listen, if I drive from Bavaria, right, I drive, I don't know, all the way to Spain, nobody checks me. You know, like, there's no tariffs there. There's nothing there, right? Today, we underestimate this. But back in the day, Hanover wouldn't have said, yeah, this chunk, I don't know, Prussian market. They don't, here's our customs border. They wouldn't have done that. But the way the system works is effectively that any given state region can only belong to any one given market. And now let's imagine this. The entirety of Bavaria is a part of the Zollverein. This includes this chunk here in the game called Bavarian Rhineland. If France takes, in a war, the Prussian Rhineland, they hold now the majority of the Rhineland state region. What does that mean? That means that this entire state region now flips to be in the French market. Why? Why do these people stop trading with the Prussian market, start trading with the French market? Why does Bavaria all of a sudden have a way of funneling goods into the French market just because they hold this territory? Why? If I am Prussia and take Luxembourg from the Dutch, at the start it belongs to the Dutch, it then becomes independent, and if I take Luxembourg after it becomes independent, it doesn't really matter when I take it, but if I take it, why does Luxembourg keep trading with Belgium and not with the Prussian market? Why am I able to funnel goods and funnel goods out of Belgium? That is a major, major concern for me. A major confusion for me. Because that's not how it works. The customs border would be right here. But since any given state region only ever belongs to one market, Luxembourg, no matter what, would remain within the Belgian market. If France took this location, the entirety of Belgium, and Prussia took Luxembourg, for no reason whatsoever, through Luxembourg, Prussia would have an entryway into the French market without any trade deals. It doesn't make sense to me. It only makes sense to me from a point of view, and this is to a degree speculation, I want to make that clear. I really, really hoped this dev diary would clear this up. It did not clear it up. It wasn't mentioned at all. It only makes sense if splitting states is not meant to be a feature outside of treaty ports and maybe some minor examples. Because effectively, if I am, for example, France, and I say I want the natural borders, which is the Rhine, according to French, right? So if I want to do this, I think the Rhine is like something like this. We have it on here? Yeah, there it is. Look at this, right? This is the Rhine. If I want the Rhine, it looks something like this, something like this. Let's not get too sweaty about the details here. I can't do that. Because I can't split the state regions. I have to go for this acquire state, I have to go for this acquire state. Even if I split them, even if there is like a scripted casus belli, even if it is modded in, the market will always be either just French for this entire thing, or just Prussian or whoever else rules the other part, right? And that's a big issue for me. I really was hoping, and I expressed this concern, I expressed this worry in the last video, I was really hoping we would make a step forward toward more granularity, where I can say, yes, I can have these borders. Maybe, you know, yes, I want to go into a very specific location here in Denmark, maybe I want to take some more, maybe I want to take some islands, you know, you can't. You either take the entire thing or you don't. Even if you split it, even if that was a mechanic, if you look around all the maps that we have seen, you can see, let me find another good example. You can see it right here, you can see it there, you can see it right here, you can see it right here in Punjab. Can we see it anywhere else here? Maybe this down there as well, but I'm not sure. Then of course you can see it right there, you can see it here. Every state region only ever belongs to one, every state region only ever belongs to one market. So like a legitimate splitting, even if you mod it in, isn't possible. The only way to actually circumvent this is to make more and smaller state regions, at which point like the entire balancing of the game is in question. You can see it right here, here, you know, all of this is one state region. This is one state region. These states, or these countries, may have nothing to do with one another, but they do. Because there's apparently no customs control between them if they are in the same state region. It concerns me, primarily because, again, it's a lateral move. We had no state splitting, well, no region splitting once you had, you know, a state there. In Victoria 2 as well. This isn't a step back, but it's not a step forward. I was really hoping they'd address it. There is some speculation here, as I mentioned, I do want to address that. There is some speculation here in which I say, hey, you know, probably that is how it works. They haven't really gone into the details, but I will be real with you. If they had like a thorough, complete solution, what I am used to, what I assume is fundamentally that we're looking at a situation where you want to drag that into the spotlight. You want to say, hey, look at this, what we did. You can split states and they will adjust to the markets. I don't think that is what is happening here. I also want to stress, I don't think this is like a game-ruining thing or whatever, right? I don't think any of that. The features that we've seen in previous Victoria 3 dev diaries are astonishing. Absolutely great. The society building, the pops, the economy, it is outstanding. I'm a big, big fan. The markets as a whole, even if I complain about markets and state regions, the markets as a whole are infinitely better than what we had in Victoria 2. But this is a big caveat for me. This is a big, big caveat for me. Because the granularity that I was hoping for isn't there. Now, there's also another issue that I do want to address, in case somebody says, oh, maybe they do allow state splitting, but just not the markets. I am concerned that you can't actually, outside of, again, these smaller issues like treaty ports, right? I am concerned that you can't actually ever do that, because they say, they said that in a previous section in the dev diary, today's dev diary, they said that pops are saved on the state level, which they are. We knew that. That is how it is, right? Like this is, yeah, no, that is how it is. Now, I thought about this as well and said, maybe you can overcome this if you still want to split states, if you still want to allow this. They said, you know, if you do split a state, treaty ports, for example, it will use a semi-proportional distribution, whatever the hell that means. We don't know. Listen, I don't know. But basically, I was thinking, if you have a state, you could, for example, and maybe we have a screenshot of this here. If not, then I'm gonna grab one quickly. Oh yeah, here we can actually see it. We have a city here, we have a city there, we have a city there. In a video about the art of Victoria 3, I noticed and mentioned that the buildings that you build are actually depicted on the map in different cities, different locations. So technically, if I have a building, let's say there's barracks right here, a pop that works in the barracks can be assigned for the purposes of splitting a state. If I split the state like this, I can say that pop clearly lives right here. If I build the barracks there, or if they're built there, then I can say that pop clearly lives right there. If we have a situation where, for example, we go and we build, I don't know, an academy over here, or maybe this looks more like an industrial, maybe mines. If I build mines up, right, the pop would live there. Meaning that even if the pop is saved on the state level, if they have work, they would be in a position where you can clearly assign them to a location because a certain tile holds that building, and that building holds that pop. So you can overcome this. I thought about this, right? But if they did that, I feel like they would have mentioned it. They say pops are stored on the state level, period. Say it right over... God, how far do I need to go? They say that pops live on the state level right over here. States, as we have previously touched on, are the main political geographical unit of Victoria 3, where pops live and buildings are built. Buildings are built on the state level, but they are depicted on the map. I do want to push that, right? They are depicted on the map in certain cities and whatnot. Right there, you can see what is built, how wealthy people are, etc., etc. So you can, even if you save pops on the state level, it looks to me as though you could save them also in certain buildings where they work and so on and so forth, whether they are rural, where they're not rural, and then you could save them and say, we have a general pop distribution that we can acknowledge here, right? But I feel like if they actually did that, they would have said it. You don't make secrets out of that sort of feature if you have both the diary, pops, national markets, buildings, and states. All of those have been done, and this hasn't been mentioned, so I have to assume it's not a thing. Otherwise, you would mention it, right? So in conclusion, after this mad rambling is over, I was really hoping that they would confirm or deny today. Actually, just clarify, basically. The idea of state regions, split states, splitting states, and national markets. But without clarification, I have to assume that we are fairly close to the Victoria 2 status quo. I was hoping we were not. This is basically the same way in its essence in Victoria 2 as well. You're not supposed to split states. You start with split states, but that is it. You start with them, there you go. You can split them in Victoria 3 in very rare occasions, it seems, but beyond that, any split state is stupid. Beyond that, any split state is stupid because it gives one nation access to another nation's market for no discernible reason, and that's really weird. That is basically my take on this. Yeah. Let me know what you think. I really hope that we would get clarification. Maybe there would be this big reveal, you know, hey, if you split states, the markets will adjust. This is just at the start of the game, it's not adjusted, but I think we would have heard about this. Yeah. I think the point that I tried to make is the Lakotan market, it's taxes here, where the Mexicans over here are forced to trade with Texas, despite very much not belonging to Texas at the time. Later on, of course, they did, very soon later on, right? But at the time they didn't. If I take Luxembourg, I gain free entry to the Belgian market for whatever reason. If I take, well, right here, they actually have access to the Prussian market, right? If I take this location, which is Hamburg, if I take that as Denmark, then I would gain access to the British market for whatever reason. It's weird. It's really weird. If I'm Russia and I take Krakow, I have access to the Austrian market, because this is Galicia-Volhynia. This is one state. So I don't think that state splitting is viable in vanilla or for modders, and I think that is a step back. Yes. I think it's a step back, because if you look at Bohemia, kind of weird. You had a legitimate distinction, of course, between, you know, the German-speaking, well, the German, ethnically German population, the culturally German population right here, the Bohemian, the Czech population right there, right? But you can't actually ever, like, you can't achieve this difference, because this state is a state region, right? So this is one thing. If I wasn't clear, I want to make this obvious as well. If I wasn't clear, if you didn't, like, really see my point, if you don't think I have a point, please write a comment. I'm very, very eager to talk about this, because honestly, this is like the biggest thorn in my side about Victoria 3, and I would love to talk about it. This is a big issue. I've thought about this quite a bit, and I'm very concerned about it, because I hope that we wouldn't be looking at the situation. But yeah, effectively, the markets don't adjust beyond state borders, state region borders, they don't adjust to like an actual market situation, because again, customs were a big deal in this period, especially in Europe. If Germany held Luxembourg, Luxembourg wouldn't be able to have a free trade with Belgium. I don't know. Maybe it's just a visual thing. That is the last sort of hope I have, where maybe, you know, actually it just looks like it's the Belgian market, but it doesn't apply. But I don't think it is, because the devs have previously said on the forums, hey, if somebody holds territory within your market, so in a state region that you hold primarily, then getting them out of your market is difficult, and that's just kind of weird, because Belgium shouldn't be forced to eat German canned food because Luxembourg is under German control, you know? That's where I'm coming from. I hope you get it. Even if you disagree, I hope you get it, just so that we can talk it out. Again, I don't think this is a game-ruining thing. I think very much that Victoria 3 has a huge, a very strong fundament to build up on. But man, disappoints me. It disappointed me quite a bit. I really hope that we would be looking at less of a lateral move and more of a move forward, where states are much more flexible, you know, where state regions and state markets are much more flexible, but it doesn't seem to be that way. Let me know what you think. Maybe there's some clarifications in the forums. Maybe somebody asks in the forums about this topic. Thank you for watching. Later today there will be a video about the general community feedback over the last couple of weeks. Love you all, and that's my concern. Cheers. See you later, alligator.